The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, but some debts take 13 generations to collect. The Blackwood estate squats like a dying beast against the Virginia sky, its columns cracked and paint peeling in the merciless August heat. Dr. Sarah Chen steps from her rental car, forensic genealogy equipment in hand, hired to untangle insurance claims surrounding the mysterious extinction of one of the South's oldest families. What should have been routine paperwork becomes something far darker when she discovers the family's meticulous records hidden behind false walls, documents spanning 2 centuries that tell a story of deliberate genetic isolation and something far worse. The plantation's original owner, Ezekiel Blackwood, didn't just own slaves. He made a pact that bound his bloodline to repeat an unspeakable cycle, generation after generation. The genetic deterioration that finally claimed the last heir wasn't natural evolution. It was justice, slow and patient, working through bloodlines like poison through water. Each generation grew weaker, stranger, more twisted, until the family tree finally collapsed under the weight of its own moral rot. But now, Sarah has disturbed the records, and something that waited 2 centuries for completion isn't finished collecting its debt. What happens when a genealogist uncovers a family tree that was meant to die, and why do the portraits in the Great Hall seem to follow her with their painted eyes? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's fingers trace the edge of a yellow document, the paper so brittle it threatens to crumble at her touch. The hidden compartment behind the library's false wall yawns open like a mouth, exhaling the stench of decay and secrets. Her penlight cuts through the gloom, illuminating rows of leather-bound ledgers and loose papers tied with ribbon that has rotted to threads. She's found family archives before. Wealthy families often hid their most damaging records. But nothing like this. The meticulous handwriting spans centuries, each entry more disturbing than the last. Birth certificates, death records, marriage licenses, and detailed genealogical charts that map bloodlines with surgical precision. But interwoven between the legitimate documents are others, contracts written in languages she doesn't recognize, sketches of symbols that make her eyes water to look at directly, and photographs that shouldn't exist given the dates written on their backs. The heat presses against the estate's windows like a living thing, making the old wood groan and settle. Sarah's shirt clings to her back as she carefully extracts a leather journal bound with what looks like human hair. The Blackwood family crest, a twisted tree with 13 branches, is burned into the cover. Property of Ezekiel Blackwood, Anno Domini 1847, reads the first page. Let this record serve as testament to the covenant sealed this day, that the Blackwood name shall endure through flesh and blood, bound by sacred obligation unto the 13th generation. Sarah's breath catches. She's spent 15 years investigating family lineages for insurance companies, uncovering fraudulent claims and hidden inheritances. She's seen everything from falsified death certificates to elaborate adoption schemes designed to steal millions. But this feels different. The writing itself seems to pulse with malevolence, as if the ink were mixed with something more than mere pigment. Outside, thunder rumbles despite the cloudless sky. Sarah glances toward the Great Hall, where dozens of oil portraits line the walls, 13 generations of Blackwood patriarchs and their pale, hollow-eyed wives. When she'd first entered the estate, she'd noticed how their painted gazes seemed to track her movement. Now, working alone in the suffocating heat, she tries to convince herself it was just the psychological effect of being in a house where an entire bloodline had simply ended. The insurance claim was straightforward enough. Hartford Mutual needed documentation to settle the estate of Marcus Blackwood, the last heir, found dead in his locked study 3 months ago. Natural causes, the coroner ruled. Heart failure brought on by severe genetic abnormalities that had plagued the family for generations. But Hartford's computers had flagged inconsistencies in the genealogical records, gaps and contradictions that suggested fraud. They'd hired Sarah to untangle the bloodlines and verify the claims. What she'd expected to find was evidence of insurance fraud, maybe some illegitimate children or falsified deaths. Instead, she'd discovered a family tree that read like a horror story. The Blackwoods had indeed owned slaves, hundreds of them across multiple plantations. But according to these hidden records, Ezekiel Blackwood had done something more than simply profit from human bondage. The journal describes rituals, binding ceremonies, and what he called the Great Work, ensuring his bloodline's prosperity through methods that made Sarah's forensic training rebel against what she was reading. Each generation had followed the pattern meticulously. The eldest Blackwood son would select a female slave, often barely past childhood, and force her into a relationship that would produce an heir. But these weren't random acts of exploitation. The records describe careful selection based on bloodlines, astrological charts, and other criteria that made no sense to modern science. The slave women were treated like breeding stock, kept in a separate wing of the house, their children raised as both heirs and prisoners. Generation after generation, the practice continued. Even after abolition, even after the Civil War reshaped the South, the Blackwoods found ways to maintain their twisted tradition. The women's names change over the decades. Sometimes they were listed as servants, later as governesses or nurses, but the pattern remained constant. One woman per generation, selected according to Ezekiel's original specifications, bound to the family until death. Sarah's hands shake as she photographs each page. The genetic consequences were inevitable. By the 10th generation, Blackwood children were being born with severe deformities. By the 12th, most died in infancy. Marcus, the 13th and final heir, had lived to 38 despite multiple genetic disorders that should have killed him decades earlier. The family tree had literally collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. But as Sarah works deeper into the night, transcribing names and dates by the light of her phone's flashlight, the estate's electricity failed hours ago. She begins to notice something else, something that makes her wish she'd never taken this assignment. The women's names are all different, spanning 2 centuries and multiple ethnicities, but their faces, captured in small daguerreotypes and later photographs tucked between the journal pages, are identical. Not similar, identical. The same woman, young and beautiful and terrified, staring back at Sarah across generations that should have made such resemblance impossible. And in the margins of the latest entries, written in Marcus Blackwood's trembling hand before his death, are 3 words repeated over and over: "She is coming." Sarah's phone buzzes against the ancient floorboards, the sound jarring in the suffocating silence. The caller ID shows Michael home, and she realizes with a start that it's nearly midnight. Her husband's worried face fills the screen when she accepts the video call, his graying beard catching the light from their kitchen back in Richmond. "Jesus, Sarah, I've been calling for hours. Are you okay?" She angles the phone away from the scattered documents, not wanting him to see the disturbing photographs spread across the dusty floor. "Sorry. The signal here is terrible. I lost track of time. You look like hell. When's the last time you ate something?" Sarah can't remember. The protein bar she'd packed sits untouched in her bag, her appetite vanishing the moment she'd opened Ezekiel's journal. "I'm fine, Michael. Just focused on the work." His expression shifts to that familiar mixture of concern and frustration she's seen too often lately. After 15 years of marriage, he knows her tells, the way she deflects when a case consumes her, the obsessive need to uncover every truth no matter the cost. It's what made her exceptional at her job and exhausting to live with. "Emma's piano recital is tomorrow night," he says quietly. "You promised you'd be there." The guilt hits like a physical blow. Their 16-year-old daughter had been practicing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major for months, her fingers dancing across the keys with the same precision Sarah applied to genealogical puzzles. Emma had inherited her mother's perfectionism, but channeled it into something beautiful instead of digging through other people's buried secrets. "I'll be there," Sarah says, though even as the words leave her mouth, She's looking at the boxes of documents still waiting to be examined. This case is just complicated. They're all complicated with you. Michael's tone carries 20 years of patient understanding wearing thin. Remember what Dr. Martinez said about work-life balance? Sarah does remember. The therapy sessions after her last breakdown, when a case involving fraudulent military records had kept her awake for 6 straight days, seeing conspiracies in every inconsistency. Michael had threatened to leave then, and she'd promised to do better, but the promise felt hollow when faced with mysteries that demanded solving. "One more day," she says. "I just need to verify a few more records." Michael sighs, and she can see their kitchen behind him. The warm yellow walls Emma had helped paint, the refrigerator covered in honor roll certificates and college brochures, their ordinary, beautiful life that feels impossibly distant from this cursed estate. "I love you," he says, "but it sounds like goodbye. But I can't keep doing this, Sarah. Emma can't keep doing this. We need a mother who's actually present." The call ends, leaving Sarah alone with the portraits whose eyes seem to gleam with satisfaction in the darkness. She stares at her reflection in the black screen. Hollow cheeks, wild hair, eyes that burn with the need to know everything, to expose every lie, to follow every thread until the truth emerges, no matter how ugly. This is who she's always been. As a child, she'd torn apart her grandmother's attic, searching for evidence that the family stories were true. In college, she'd chosen forensic genealogy because it combined her love of puzzles with her compulsion to verify facts that others took on faith. Every case was personal, every inconsistency a challenge to her core belief that truth was absolute and discoverable. But this case feels different. The identical faces staring back at her from photographs separated by decades make her question not just the Blackwood records, but her own sanity. The careful documentation of ritualistic abuse spanning centuries should repel her, send her running back to Richmond and her normal life. Instead, she finds herself drawn deeper, needing to understand how such systematic horror could continue for so long. Her phone shows 17 missed calls from her assistant, Rebecca, who's been handling Sarah's other cases while she's buried herself in Blackwood documents. There's also a text from her doctor's office about missing her annual physical and an email from Emma's guidance counselor wanting to discuss college applications. The real world is calling her back, reminding her of responsibilities and relationships that matter more than dead people's secrets. But as Sarah looks at Marcus Blackwood's final entry, "She is coming," repeated until the words become illegible scratches, she knows she can't leave. Not yet. Whatever happened in this house, whatever drove an entire bloodline to extinction, it's still here. And, for the first time in her career, Sarah Chen faces a truth she's not sure she wants to uncover. The rational part of her mind whispers that one more night won't hurt, that she can solve this mystery and still make it home in time for Emma's recital. But deep down, she knows she's lying to herself just like the Blackwoods lied to themselves for 13 generations, telling comfortable stories to justify terrible choices. Sarah forces herself to pack the documents back into their hiding place, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the tremor she can't quite suppress. The rational choice is clear: drive back to Richmond tonight, make Emma's recital, salvage what's left of her marriage, and file a preliminary report with Hartford Mutual. Let someone else untangle the Blackwood mysteries. She's sealing the final box when she hears it, a sound that shouldn't exist in an empty house. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving across the floor above her. Sarah freezes, her penlight beam wavering against the library wall. The estate has been vacant for 3 months. The caretaker who let her in yesterday mentioned that locals avoid the property, crossing themselves when they drive past the wrought iron gates. No one should be here. The footsteps continue, a measured pace that suggests familiarity with the house's layout. Not the hurried movement of an intruder, but someone who belongs here. Someone who knows exactly where they're going. Sarah's forensic training kicks in, Document the intrusion, call for help, retreat to safety, but her phone shows no signal and the nearest neighbor is 3 miles down a road that becomes impassable in darkness. She's trapped with whatever, or whoever, is walking through the Blackwood house at midnight. The footsteps stop directly above her head. Then, impossibly, she hears humming. A woman's voice, young and sweet, carrying a melody that seems familiar though Sarah can't place it. The sound drifts through the old floorboards like smoke, and with it comes the scent of jasmine, overpowering in the stifling heat, alien in a house that smells of decay and dust. Sarah's penlight finds the photographs scattered across her makeshift workspace, and her blood turns to ice. The identical faces that had puzzled her for hours are no longer staring directly at the camera. Now they're looking up, toward the ceiling, toward the source of that impossible humming. The photos have changed. She grabs the nearest image, a daguerreotype labeled Celeste, 1847, and holds it under the light. The young woman's face, which had been centered in the frame, now gazes upward with an expression of desperate hope. Her lips, previously pressed together in resignation, are now parted as if she's trying to speak. Sarah's scientific mind rebels against what she's seeing. Photographs don't change, chemical processes don't reverse themselves. But as she examines image after image, the evidence is undeniable. Every woman captured in those pictures is now looking toward the same point above Sarah's head. The humming grows louder, more insistent, and Sarah recognizes the melody at last. It's Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Emma has been practicing for months, the same notes that drift through their Richmond home each evening as their daughter prepares for tomorrow's recital. The connection hits Sarah like a physical blow. Emma's age, 16, the same age as most of the women in the photographs. Emma's talent, her beauty, her innocence. Everything the Blackwood men had sought across 13 generations. Above her, the footsteps resume, moving toward the main staircase. Toward Sarah. She has seconds to choose. Run for her car and drive away from this house, away from the mysteries that have already cost her sleep and sanity. Return to her family, her normal life, her rational world where photographs don't move and dead bloodlines stay dead. Or follow the footsteps upstairs and confront whatever force has been calling to her since she first opened Ezekiel's journal. Face the truth that Marcus Blackwood predicted in his final, frantic writings. She is coming. The humming stops abruptly, replaced by a voice that seems to come from the very walls of the house. Young, desperate, achingly familiar, help us. Sarah's hands shake as she grabs her phone and camera. Every instinct screams at her to leave, to choose her family over this supernatural puzzle. But the photographs in her hands tell a different story. 13 generations of women who were never helped, never saved, never given the choice Sarah has right now. The footsteps on the stairs are getting closer, each step accompanied by the rustle of a dress that belonged to no century Sarah recognizes. The scent of jasmine grows stronger, mixing with something else, the copper smell of old blood, the sweet stench of decay masked by perfume. Sarah stands, her legs unsteady beneath her. She thinks of Emma's fingers dancing across piano keys, of Michael's worried face on the video call, of the life waiting for her 3 hours away in Richmond. Then she looks at the changed photographs, at the desperate hope in those identical faces, and makes the choice that will damn her. She walks toward the library door, toward the footsteps, toward whatever truth the Blackwood house has been hiding for 175 years. Behind her, the photographs rustle like living things, and for the first time since arriving at the estate, Sarah Chen admits to herself that some mysteries are worth more than the price of uncovering them, even if that price is everything she's ever loved. Sarah's hand freezes on the library door handle, her courage evaporating as suddenly as it had appeared. The footsteps have stopped just beyond the threshold, and in that terrible silence, reality crashes back over her like a cold wave. What is she doing? She presses her back against the door, heart hammering against her ribs. 3 hours away, Michael is probably lying awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if his wife has finally crossed the line from obsessive to insane. Tomorrow evening, Emma will sit at the piano bench in the school auditorium, scanning the audience for a mother who might not be there. Again, the rational part of her mind, the part that earned her PhD in genealogical research, that built a reputation for meticulous fact-checking and scientific methodology, screams that she's having a breakdown. Stress-induced hallucinations, sleep deprivation, the mind's tendency to find patterns where none exist, especially in environments primed for supernatural suggestion. Photographs don't change. Dead women don't hum Chopin. And whatever she heard walking through this house has a logical explanation that doesn't involve curses or family bloodlines coming back from the grave. But even as she tries to rationalize what she's experienced, Sarah can't escape the weight of evidence she's uncovered. 13 generations of documented abuse, women whose faces remained identical across centuries, a family tree that collapsed into genetic ruin through systematic exploitation. These are facts, recorded in careful handwriting and preserved photographs, facts that demand explanation. Her phone buzzes with a text from Rebecca. Sarah, the Henderson case deadline moved up. Need your analysis by noon tomorrow. Everything okay? The normal world intrudes again, reminding her of professional obligations and a career she spent 15 years building. She has other cases waiting, other mysteries that don't threaten her sanity or her marriage. Hartford Mutual hired her to verify insurance claims, not to chase supernatural theories through a crumbling plantation house. She could leave right now, file a preliminary report citing inconclusive records, and recommend a more thorough investigation by someone else, someone who doesn't see moving photographs or hear impossible music, someone who can separate professional duty from personal obsession. But Emma's face keeps surfacing in her mind. Not her 16-year-old daughter practicing piano, but Emma at 6, asking why some people in old family photos looked sad. Emma at 10, helping Sarah research their own genealogy and marveling at the stories hidden in public records. Emma, who inherited her mother's curiosity about the past, her need to understand how families were made and broken across generations. Sarah thinks of all the women in those photographs, reduced to breeding stock by men who treated human beings like property. Celeste, who was barely older than Emma when Ezekiel Blackwood began his great work. The unnamed girl from 1863, clutching a baby that probably died before its first birthday. Mary from 1891, whose medical records described injuries that made Sarah sick to read. Who had fought for them? Who had investigated their disappearances, their suffering, their deaths? No one. They'd been erased from history except for these hidden records, their stories buried beneath layers of wealth and social respectability. The footsteps resume above her head, slower now, as if whoever walks the Blackwood halls can sense her hesitation. The jasmine scent fades, replaced by the house's usual smell of decay and abandonment. Even the supernatural forces seem to be giving up on her. Sarah's hands shake as she pulls out her phone to call Michael. She'll apologize, promise to drive home immediately, swear that this was the last case that would consume her like this. She'll make Emma's recital and be the mother her daughter deserves. She'll choose the living over the dead. But as she starts to dial, her phone's flashlight illuminates one of the scattered photographs at her feet. It's the image of Celeste from 1847, and now the young woman's face is turned toward Sarah with an expression of heartbreaking betrayal. Her mouth is open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that transcends death itself. Around Celeste's image, the other photographs seem to writhe in the wavering light. Generations of identical faces, all looking at Sarah with the same desperate plea, "Don't leave us, don't let them win, don't let our suffering be forgotten again." Sarah realizes she's crying. When did that start? And her tears blur the boundary between past and present, between rational investigation and personal crusade. She's spent her career uncovering other people's secrets, maintaining professional distance from the human stories hidden in genealogical records. But this case has stripped away every defense, every rational barrier she's constructed between herself and the truth. The house settles around her with a sound like sighing, and Sarah understands that this moment will define everything that follows. She can choose safety, sanity, the preservation of her family and career, or she can choose justice for women whose names were erased from history, whose suffering was buried beneath layers of respectability and time. Above her, the footsteps wait. The photographs watch with living eyes, and Sarah Chen stands at the crossroads between the person she's been and the person this truth will make her become. Sarah wipes her tears with the back of her hand, the salt stinging her chapped skin. The photographs at her feet seem to pulse in the wavering light, those desperate faces holding her gaze like anchors, dragging her deeper into waters she'll never escape. She thinks of Michael's tired voice, of Emma's piano music drifting through their warm kitchen, of the life she's about to sacrifice on the altar of someone else's ancient pain. But that's the lie she's been telling herself, isn't it? This isn't someone else's pain anymore. The moment she opened Ezekiel's journal, the moment she saw Celeste's face staring back at her across centuries, it became personal. These women are speaking to her specifically, calling to something in her own damaged psyche that recognizes their abandonment. Sarah picks up her phone and dials Michael's number. He answers on the first ring. "Sarah? Thank God. When are you coming home?" "I'm not." The words come out flat, final. "I can't leave this, Michael. Not yet." "What do you mean you can't leave?" "It's a job, Sarah. It's just another genealogy case." She laughs, a sound that echoes strangely in the empty library. "It's not just another case. These women—" She stops, knowing how insane she'll sound. "I found something here, something that matters. More than your daughter matters, more than our marriage matters." The words hit like physical blows, but Sarah doesn't flinch. She's crossed some invisible line, and there's no walking it back. "Tell Emma I'm sorry about the recital. Tell her I'm trying to help someone who can't help herself." "Sarah, listen to yourself. You sound crazy." She's standing now, the phone pressed to her ear like a lifeline to a world she's choosing to leave behind. "Maybe I am, but I'm also right about this. The Blackwood family didn't just die out, Michael. They were destroyed by something they started, something that's still here." Above her, the footsteps resume their patient circuit, waiting for her to finish severing the last threads connecting her to safety. The jasmine scent returns, stronger now, as if approving of her choice. "I'm filing for separation," Michael says quietly. "I can't do this anymore. Emma can't do this anymore." Sarah closes her eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of bridges burning behind her. It's happened before, relationships sacrificed to her need for truth, friendships lost to her inability to let mysteries lie. But this feels different, bigger. This feels like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "I understand," she says. "I love you both, but I have to finish this." She ends the call before he can respond, then turns off the phone completely. The outside world, her career, her family, her rational life, disappears with that simple gesture. Now there's only the house, the photographs, and the truth that's been waiting 175 years for someone to uncover it. Sarah gathers the scattered images from the floor, no longer surprised when their expressions shift to show something like gratitude. These women understand sacrifice. They know what it costs to fight against forces that would rather see you erased than remember your suffering. She thinks of Emma one last time, not with guilt, but with fierce protectiveness. Her daughter will grow up in a world where Sarah fought for women who had no one to fight for them. Emma will inherit a legacy of justice instead of complicity, even if she never understands the price her mother paid for it. The library door opens easily under Sarah's hand, as if the house itself is welcoming her deeper into its secrets. The hallway beyond stretches into darkness, but she's no longer afraid. She's chosen her side in this ancient war between truth and comfortable lies. Her footsteps join the phantom ones above as she climbs the main staircase, each step taking her further from the person she was and closer to whatever she's becoming. Behind her, the hidden documents seem to rustle with approval. Ahead, the jasmine scent grows stronger, mixed now with something else, the metallic tang of old blood, the sweet corruption of secrets finally exposed to light. Sarah reaches the second-floor landing and pauses, listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere in these rooms lies the final piece of the Blackwood puzzle, the truth that drove Marcus to his frantic final entries. Whatever force destroyed 13 generations of genetic oppressors is still here, still hungry, still waiting. She thinks she should be terrified, but instead feels something like relief. For the first time in her adult life, she's chosen absolute commitment over compromise. No more balanced investigations or professional distance. No more pretending she can uncover truth without being changed by it. The footsteps above her stop, and in that silence, Sarah Chen takes her final step across the threshold. The woman who climbed these stairs is gone, replaced by something harder, more focused, utterly dedicated to seeing this through to whatever end awaits. Behind her, the normal world fades into memory. Ahead lies only darkness, truth, and the price of justice for women whose names were written in blood. Sarah stands motionless on the second-floor landing, letting her eyes adjust to the deeper darkness that pools in these upper reaches of the house. The silence stretches between heartbeats, broken only by the settling groans of timber that has witnessed too much history. Then, from the room directly ahead, the master bedroom, according to the floor plans she studied, comes a sound that makes her blood freeze. Crying, soft, heartbroken weeping that seems to come from everywhere at once. She moves toward the sound, her footsteps unnaturally loud on the worn carpet. The master bedroom door stands ajar, and beyond it, Sarah glimpses movement, shadows that shift independent of any light source. The jasmine scent is overwhelming here, mixed with something medicinal that reminds her of old hospitals, of places where suffering occurred behind closed doors. "Hello?" Her voice cracks on the word, sounding absurdly formal in the face of whatever haunts these rooms. The crying stops abruptly, replaced by a rustling like fabric being smoothed with nervous hands. Sarah pushes the door open and steps inside. The room is exactly as she expected from the photographs. Massive four-poster bed, heavy draperies, furniture that screams of old money and older cruelty, but scattered across every surface are documents she's never seen before. Letters written in flowing script, medical records with faded letterheads, birth certificates for children who died too young. The papers seem to glow faintly in the darkness, as if illuminated by their own terrible significance. At the room's center, translucent as morning mist, stands a young woman in a dress from another century. Her face is the same one Sarah has memorized from dozens of photographs. Celeste, the first victim of Ezekiel's great work. But this version of her looks older somehow, worn down by experiences that transcended death itself. "You came," Celeste says, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I wasn't certain you would choose us over them." Sarah's scientific mind recoils, even as her heart recognizes the truth of what she's seeing. "This isn't possible. You're not really here. Neither are you. Fully. Not anymore." Celeste moves closer, and Sarah can smell the jasmine that clings to her like perfume and poison. The moment you opened Ezekiel's journal, you began crossing over. Each document you read, each photograph you studied, you've been joining us piece by piece. The room begins to shift around them. The wallpaper bleeds decades in reverse, showing the space as it was in 1847, then 1863, then 1891. Sarah watches herself standing in the same spot where generation after generation of women suffered, bled, died to feed a family's supernatural hunger for genetic perfection. "What are you?" Sarah whispers. "We are what remains when justice is denied." Other figures begin materializing, the unnamed girl from 1863 clutching her phantom baby, Mary from 1891, her face bearing the marks of violence that killed her, dozens more, an army of the discarded and destroyed. We are the price the Blackwood line finally had to pay. Sarah understands now why the photographs changed, why she heard footsteps and music that shouldn't exist. The house isn't haunted. It's transformed, turned into a repository for suffering that demanded acknowledgement. Every woman who died here left something behind, a fragment of justice deferred but never forgotten. The genetic collapse, Sarah says. It wasn't natural. We poisoned them from within. Celeste's smile is terrible and beautiful. Every forced pregnancy, every child born of rape, every woman who died trying to give them their perfect bloodline, we made sure their descendants carried our curse forward. Madness, sterility, birth defects that grew worse with each generation, we turned their weapon against them. The documents scattered around the room flutter without any breeze, pages turning to reveal medical records that tell the true story of the Blackwood decline. Hereditary insanity, children born with fatal defects, men who died young from diseases that had no name, 13 generations slowly poisoned by the accumulated suffering of their victims. Marcus Blackwood knew, Sarah says, remembering his frantic final entries. He tried to break the cycle. Too late. By then, we were too strong, and they were too weak. Celeste gestures to the other spirits surrounding them. We waited until the bloodline was reduced to its final member, and then we collected what was owed. Sarah should be terrified, should be running for her car and the highway that leads back to sanity. Instead, she feels a deep satisfaction, as if some fundamental equation has finally balanced. What happens now? Now you help us finish what we started. Celeste moves to the window, gazing out at grounds where slave quarters once housed the women they destroyed. Our work here is done, but there are other families, other bloodlines built on the bones of the powerless. They need someone who understands the true cost of silence. Sarah realizes what's being offered, or demanded. Partnership with forces that transcend death, a crusade that will consume whatever remains of her normal life. She thinks of Michael's ultimatum, of Emma's recital that she'll never attend, of the career she's already sacrificing. The choice is yours, Celeste says, but choose quickly. Dawn comes, and with it, the last chance to join us willingly. Around Sarah, the spirits wait with infinite patience, and she understands that she's already crossed too far to turn back. Sarah stares at the assembled spirits, her mind racing through possibilities that all lead to the same inevitable conclusion. The woman who drove to Virginia 3 days ago no longer exists, that Sarah had a mortgage, a marriage, a daughter's recital to attend. This Sarah stands in a room thick with supernatural justice, surrounded by the vengeful dead who offer partnership in a war against bloodlines built on suffering. Other families, she repeats slowly. You want me to investigate them, to find evidence of their crimes. Evidence is only the beginning. Celeste's form flickers like candlelight, sometimes solid enough to cast shadows, sometimes translucent as smoke. We need someone who exists in your world, who can access records and properties, who can prepare the ground for our justice. Through the bedroom window, the first pale hint of dawn touches the horizon. Sarah feels time pressing against her like a physical weight. In her pocket, her silent phone holds dozens of missed calls from Michael, probably from her office, from a life that expects her to return and pretend this never happened. Show me, she says. The room dissolves around them. Sarah finds herself standing in a modern office building, watching her translucent reflection move through cubicles toward a conference room where Hartford Mutual executives discuss quarterly reports. But overlaid on this mundane scene, she sees other images. Plantation houses across the south, industrial mansions in the north, sprawling estates built on foundations of human misery. Family trees that branch and spread like infection through America's genealogical records. The Ashworth textile fortune. Celeste's voice echoes from everywhere at once. Built on mills that consumed immigrant children. The Fairfax shipping empire, slave labor disguised as indentured servitude well into the 20th century. The Kellerman agricultural dynasty, where migrant workers disappear and their families never ask questions. Sarah watches herself sitting in that conference room, accepting new cases with professional detachment while invisible women scream for justice behind glass windows that reflect nothing but empty air. She sees herself returning to Hartford, filing reports that ignore the deeper truths, choosing career stability over moral obligation. The vision shifts. Now she's in a university lecture hall, teaching a genealogy course to graduate students. But the family trees she draws on the whiteboard bleed red ink, and the students' faces blur into the features of long-dead children who never lived to have descendants of their own. Her own daughter sits in the front row, older now, asking why her mother abandoned her to chase ghosts that couldn't be saved. That's one future, Celeste says, the path of willful blindness. Another scene unfolds. Sarah stands in a cemetery at midnight, surrounded by spirits that grow stronger with each investigation she completes. Her hair has gone white, her body bears the marks of confrontations with living descendants who would rather kill than see their family's secrets exposed. She's alone. Michael remarried years ago. Emma sends Christmas cards but never visits. But she's not empty. Purpose fills the spaces where human connection once lived. And that's the other, Celeste whispers, the price of absolute justice. Sarah watches herself in this future, placing flowers on graves of women whose names she restored to history. She sees herself breaking into archives, stealing documents, confronting wealthy families with evidence of their ancestors' crimes. Some flee their inherited wealth, donating fortunes to repair damage that can never truly be undone. Others fight back with lawyers, threats, violence that leaves scars on her increasingly isolated existence. But in this vision, the women around her are no longer confined to photographs and whispered testimony. They walk beside her through the world, visible only to Sarah but powerful enough to reach across the boundary between life and death. Justice follows in their wake like wildfire. You'll make me like you, Sarah realizes. Neither alive nor dead, but something in between, will make you effective. Celeste's form solidifies as dawn light strengthens beyond the windows. Your world respects credentials, academic authority, legal documentation. We can show you where to look, but you must be the one who looks. Sarah thinks of Emma, probably lying awake in her childhood bedroom, wondering why her mother chose strangers over family. Michael will explain it as mental illness, the final breakdown of a woman who spent too much time digging through other people's tragedies. Emma will grow up believing her mother was sick rather than committed, lost rather than transformed. It should hurt more than it does. The fact that it doesn't tells Sarah everything she needs to know about how far she's already traveled from her former life. When dawn breaks completely, the offer ends, Celeste says. Choose quickly. Join us willingly, or spend whatever remains of your normal life knowing you had the chance to balance the scales and chose comfort instead. Around Sarah, documents flutter like wings preparing for flight. The spirits wait with expressions of terrible patience. Outside, pink light spills across Virginia countryside where cotton once grew in fields fertilized by human suffering. Sarah closes her eyes and steps forward into whatever she's becoming. The moment Sarah's foot touches the circle of spirits, agony explodes through every cell in her body. Her skeleton feels like it's dissolving, her blood burning away, her consciousness scattered across dimensions that have no names. She tries to scream but has no throat, tries to flee but has no legs, tries to think but her mind fragments into 1,000 screaming pieces. This is dying, she realizes, with crystalline clarity. This is what they felt. Every woman who suffered here, every child torn from unwilling bodies, every life extinguished to feed the Blackwood hunger. The pain intensifies until it transcends physical sensation, becoming something that rewrites the fundamental code of her existence. Sarah experiences 13 generations of agony compressed into seconds that stretch like centuries. She feels Celeste's terror during her first rape, the unnamed girl's despair as she bled to death in childbirth, Mary's rage as hands closed around her throat. Dozens more, their suffering becomes hers, their memories burning themselves into neural pathways that shouldn't be able to contain such vast anguish. Every transformation requires death, Celeste's voice reaches her from across an ocean of pain. You cannot serve justice while clinging to the woman who chose comfort over truth. Sarah feels her former self disintegrating. Dr. Sarah Chen, forensic genealogist, loving mother, faithful wife, that person crumbles like ancient paper exposed to flame. In her place, something harder crystallizes, something that can look at family trees built on mass graves without flinching, something that values truth above personal happiness, justice above human connection. The bedroom snaps back into focus around her, but everything has changed. The wallpaper breathes with organic rhythm, pulsing like exposed arteries. The portraits on the walls turn to follow her movement, their painted eyes now windows into realms where the dead maintain their vigil. Most shocking of all, she can see herself. Her own reflection in the dresser mirror shows a woman whose features are becoming translucent, whose skin carries the faint luminescence of the other spirits. The process has begun, Celeste explains, her voice now coming from inside Sarah's own mind. You'll remain corporeal enough to function in the living world, but you belong to us now. Our memories are your memories. Our purpose is your purpose. Sarah raises her hand and watches dawn light pass through her palm like she's made of colored glass. The sensation should terrify her, but instead she feels relief. The weight of maintaining human relationships while pursuing inhuman truths, that impossible balance that destroyed her marriage, has been lifted. Now she can be what she was always meant to become, an instrument of reckoning. The other families, she says, surprised by how her voice echoes with harmonics that weren't there before. Show me their locations. The room explodes into kaleidoscopic visions. Sarah sees herself 6 months from now, standing in the marble foyer of an Ashworth mansion in South Carolina, watching the current family patriarch realize that someone has found the mill records documenting which children fell into the machinery and which were pushed. She sees herself in a Boston law office, presenting evidence that the Fairfax shipping fortune was built on a slave trade that continued decades after abolition, using falsified immigration documents to disguise human trafficking. Each future investigation plays out like a film reel made of light and shadow. Sarah witnesses herself becoming something unprecedented in the modern world, a forensic genealogist backed by supernatural authority, capable of uncovering truths that were meant to stay buried forever. She sees wealthy families crumbling as their carefully maintained legacies dissolve under the weight of documented atrocities. Some flee the country rather than face the consequences. Others try to have her killed, but how do you murder someone who's already half dead? The visions accelerate. Years collapse into moments as Sarah watches herself aging in service to justice that transcends human law. Her hair whitens, her body grows thin, but her power increases exponentially. By her 60th birthday, she can summon the spirits of the wronged simply by speaking their names. By 70, she can kill with a touch, stopping hearts that beat with blood stolen from generations of victims. Emma, she whispers, seeing her daughter in those future glimpses. First confused and angry, then grieving, finally accepting that her mother chose a higher calling than maternal love. She'll understand eventually, Celeste promises, when she's older, when she sees how the world changes because of what you've done. The families you destroy can never harm another generation. The wealth you redistribute finds its way to descendants of those who were destroyed. Justice spreads like infection through bloodlines that thought they were immune to consequences. Outside, full dawn breaks across the Virginia countryside, sealing Sarah's transformation. She looks around the bedroom one last time, seeing not the antique furniture but the layers of suffering that soaked into these walls over 13 decades. The Blackwood family paid their debt in genetic collapse and madness, but they were only the beginning. Sarah Chen, or whatever she's becoming, has work to do. The spirits around her begin to fade as morning light strengthens, but she can feel their presence settling into her bones like a permanent haunting. When she walks out of this house, she'll carry them with her, an army of the wronged, hungry for justice that only she can deliver. Her phone buzzes with another call from Michael, but she doesn't reach for it. That life ended the moment she chose truth over comfort. Now begins the ordeal of making the world pay for its carefully forgotten sins. The first sign that something has gone catastrophically wrong comes when Sarah tries to leave the estate. She walks toward her rental car with newfound purpose burning in her chest, the spirit's presence humming through her transformed bones like electricity. The documentation she needs is clear in her mind. Bank records, shipping manifests, medical files that will expose the Ashworth textile fortune for what it truly was. She can almost see the headlines, feel the satisfaction of another bloodline crumbling under the weight of its own sins. But when she grasps the car door handle, her hand passes straight through the metal. Sarah stares at her translucent fingers, panic clawing up her throat. She tries again, concentrating every ounce of will into making contact with the physical world. This time she manages to brush the handle, but can't generate enough substance to actually pull it open. "Celeste!" Her voice echoes with supernatural harmonics across the empty grounds, but no spirit answers. The dawn light that seemed to seal her transformation now feels like a cage, burning through her increasingly ethereal form. She stumbles back toward the house, each step requiring tremendous effort to maintain contact with the ground. By the time she reaches the front porch, she's more ghost than woman, her reflection in the door's glass panels barely visible even to herself. Inside, the other spirits have vanished completely. The bedroom where she made her choice stands empty, wallpaper returned to its faded mundane state, portraits once again frozen in painted silence. Only the scattered documents remain as proof that any of it happened. But when Sarah tries to gather them, her fingers pass through paper like smoke through air. "This isn't what you promised," she whispers to the empty rooms. Her words fade into silence that offers no response, no explanation, no way back. Trapped in the house, Sarah tries calling Michael on the phone she can no longer hold. After an hour of failed attempts to dial numbers her fingers can't touch, she finally manages to activate the speaker function through sheer desperation. "Sarah? Jesus Christ, where are you? Emma's recital was yesterday. She waited until the last possible moment for you to show up." Michael's voice carries a pain that cuts through her supernatural detachment like acid. She cried herself to sleep asking what she did wrong, why her mother abandoned her. Sarah opens her mouth to explain, to tell him about justice and transformation and the greater good, but no sound emerges. The connection between her consciousness and the physical world has grown too tenuous for human speech. "I'm done, Sarah. Whatever breakdown you're having, whatever obsession has taken over your life, I can't protect Emma from it anymore. I filed the divorce papers this morning. Temporary custody until you get the help you obviously need." The line goes dead. Sarah stares at the phone, understanding with crystalline horror that her sacrifice was meaningless. She can't investigate other families if she can't touch documents, can't drive to their estates, can't exist in the world of the living long enough to expose their crimes. The spirits used her transformation to anchor themselves to the physical realm, then abandoned her to fade into nothingness. Hours pass like years as Sarah attempts increasingly desperate measures to regain substance. She focuses on memories of Emma's laugh, tries to channel maternal love into corporal form. She concentrates on rage at the injustices she discovered, hoping anger might give her enough weight to function. Nothing works. With each attempt, she becomes more translucent, more disconnected from everything that once defined her existence. By afternoon, she can barely see her own reflection. The phone has become impossible to operate. The documents mock her from the floor, full of evidence she can observe but never use. She sacrificed everything, marriage, daughter, career, life itself, for a mission she's now too insubstantial to complete. The cruelest irony becomes clear as evening approaches. She's trapped in the same liminal space as the women who suffered here, but unlike them, she has no unfinished business to sustain her presence. They were murdered, raped, exploited. Their rage gave them power to reach across death for justice. Sarah chose her fate willingly, and that choice left her without the fury necessary to remain coherent. Emma will grow up believing her mother was mentally ill. Michael will remarry eventually, give their daughter the stable home that Sarah's obsession with truth destroyed. The Ashworth family, the Fairfaxes, all the other bloodlines built on suffering, they'll continue accumulating wealth and power while their victims remain voiceless. As darkness falls over the estate, Sarah feels herself dispersing like mist in wind. The last coherent thought she manages before dissolving completely is a question that echoes through empty rooms. What good is justice if it costs you the very humanity needed to achieve it? The house settles into silence, holding one more ghost who chose righteousness over love and lost everything for nothing. But Sarah doesn't dissolve. Instead, in that moment of complete surrender, when her last coherent thought releases its grip on righteousness and grasps only the devastating truth of what she's lost, something fundamental shifts in the fabric of her existence. The approaching dissolution suddenly reverses, like a tide pulling back from shore, and Sarah feels herself snapping into sharp, terrible focus. She's not becoming more solid. If anything, her translucent form grows even more ethereal in the moonlight streaming through cracked windows. But her consciousness crystallizes with brutal clarity, and with it comes a revelation that makes her want to scream. The spirits never lied to her. They simply omitted the most crucial detail. Sarah sees it now, written in the very architecture of her transformation. She was never meant to investigate other families. She was never intended to be their instrument of justice in the living world. She was meant to become exactly what she is, another ghost trapped in the Blackwood estate, another victim whose story would be forgotten, whose sacrifice would mean nothing. The curse that consumed 13 generations of Blackwoods didn't end with the last heir's death in 2019. It evolved. You understand now. Celeste's voice materializes from the shadows, but there's no triumph in it, only infinite sadness. The curse feeds on moral corruption, yes, but what is more corrupt than convincing someone to abandon their child in service to a lie? Sarah whirls toward the voice, her ghostly form rippling with sudden fury. You made me choose. You chose, Celeste interrupts, just as we all chose. I chose to trust Master Blackwood when he promised to free me if I bore him a son. The others chose to believe their suffering had meaning, that their deaths would protect future generations. Every woman trapped here chose to hope rather than accept the truth. Around Sarah, the other spirits begin materializing like photographs developing in chemical baths. Not the avenging angels she thought she was joining, but victims just like herself. Women who sacrificed everything for promises that were never meant to be kept. The estate needs fresh ghosts to maintain its power, the unnamed girl explains, her form flickering between child and woman. Every few decades, someone like you arrives, someone with enough moral certainty to choose justice over love, truth over happiness. Your transformation doesn't serve justice, it serves the curse. Sarah feels the walls closing in, but not physically. Something far worse is contracting around her. The realization that her entire investigation was orchestrated. The insurance case that seemed so routine, the conveniently placed documents, even her own obsessive need to uncover truth, all of it designed to lead her exactly where she stands now. The other families you saw in your visions, Mary adds, her throat bearing the eternal marks of strangulation. They don't exist, or rather they exist, but not as you believed. They're not dynasties built on hidden atrocities, they're normal families with normal amounts of inherited guilt and historical complicity, nothing that would justify the supernatural persecution you imagined unleashing upon them. The room spins around Sarah. As the full scope of her delusion becomes clear, she sees herself as she really was in those final days at the estate, not a noble seeker of truth, but a woman having a complete psychological break. The spirits she thought were guiding her were manifestations of her own fractured psyche, projected onto a house that had been empty for years. The documents she found were real, but the supernatural framework she built around them was elaborate self-deception. She abandoned her daughter for nothing, destroyed her marriage for nothing, chose righteousness over love for a cause that existed only in her guilt-ridden imagination. But even as this revelation devastates her, Sarah notices something the other spirits seem unaware of. Her phone, lying on the floor where she dropped it hours ago, is blinking with an unread message, and despite her ethereal state, despite every failed attempt to interact with physical objects, she finds she can suddenly touch it. The text is from Emma, sent 3 hours ago. Mom, Dad told me about the divorce. I don't understand why you left, but I know you think you're helping people somehow. I love you. Please come home. Sarah stares at the message, understanding flooding through her with the force of lightning. The curse feeds on moral corruption. But what if choosing love over justice isn't corruption? What if the greatest moral act is admitting when righteousness becomes another form of selfishness? A reflection in the phone's black screen shows a woman who is no longer dissolving, no longer transforming into something inhuman. She's still translucent, still marked by her encounter with forces beyond normal understanding, but she's no longer trapped between life and death. That's impossible, Celeste whispers, her form beginning to fade. The choice was made, the transformation completed. The choice was never between justice and love, Sarah realizes, her voice growing stronger. It was between pride and humility, between believing I was special enough to save everyone and accepting that saving one person, my own daughter, might be enough. The house shudders around them, as something ancient and hungry feels its latest victim slipping away. The shuddering intensifies, and Sarah feels the curse's rage like a physical force trying to drag her back into dissolution. But Emma's message pulses in her hand like a lifeline, each word anchoring her more firmly to the world of the living. The other spirits watch in amazement as Sarah's form begins to solidify, translucence giving way to something approaching substance. How? Mary gasps, her own ghostly outline flickering with what might be hope. Sarah looks up from the phone, understanding crystallizing with each heartbeat she can suddenly feel again. Because I'm choosing differently, not justice over love or love over justice, but admitting I don't have to save the world to save what matters. The house groans in protest, wallpaper peeling away in strips that reveal the rotting wood beneath. Windows rattle in their frames as the curse fights to maintain its hold, but Sarah can feel its power weakening. For the first time in centuries, someone has seen through its fundamental deception. The lie that righteousness justifies abandonment, that moral certainty excuses the destruction of everything you claim to protect. The documents, Sarah says, suddenly understanding. They're real, but they're not evidence of supernatural evil. They're just history, terrible human history that doesn't require ghostly intervention to address. She moves toward the scattered papers with growing confidence, and this time her fingers don't pass through them. The genealogical records, the medical files, the financial documents, all of it solid, touchable, real, evidence that could expose historical injustices through proper legal channels, academic research, reparative justice movements led by actual communities rather than self-appointed saviors. I can still use this, she realizes, but as Sarah Chen, forensic genealogist, not as some supernatural instrument of vengeance. Behind her, Celeste's form wavers between desperation and something that might be relief. The curse won't let you leave. The curse needs people who believe they're more important than their own humanity, Sarah interrupts. I'm not that person anymore. She pulls out her phone and dials Michael's number. This time, her fingers work perfectly, pressing each digit with deliberate precision. When he answers, his voice is cautious, tired. Sarah, I'm coming home, she says simply. I need help, professional help. And I need to apologize to Emma for everything. The silence stretches long enough that Sarah wonders if the connection dropped. Finally, Michael speaks, his voice thick with emotion. Are you really ready to come home? Not just physically, but I chose my obsession with truth over my daughter's well-being, Sarah says, the words cutting like glass. I told myself it was noble, but it was just another form of selfishness, the most destructive kind, because I convinced myself I was saving the world. Around her, the other spirits begin to glow with soft light. Not the eerie phosphorescence of the supernatural, but something warmer, hopeful. If you can choose differently, Celeste whispers, then perhaps you can too, Sarah confirms. The curse only has power over people who believe they have to choose between love and justice, who think they're too important to accept ordinary human happiness. But what if ordinary happiness is enough? What if protecting one child matters more than exposing a dozen historical injustices? The house shudders again, but this time it feels less like anger and more like something ancient finally beginning to release its breath. Through the windows, Sarah can see dawn approaching, not the false dawn that trapped her in transformation, but real morning light carrying the promise of genuine new beginnings. "I'll take the documents to the National Archives," she tells the spirits, gathering the papers with steady hands. "I'll work with historians and community organizations to ensure this information reaches the right people, but I'll do it as a living woman with a daughter who needs her, not as some ghostly crusader." One by one, the spirits begin to fade, but not into dissolution, into peace. They're finally free to move on because someone has broken the cycle that kept them trapped between rage and resignation. Celeste is the last to go. "Tell your Emma," she says, her voice growing distant, "that her mother learned something important here, that choosing love doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Sarah nods, tucking the phone into her pocket alongside the genealogical evidence. Outside, her rental car waits in the morning light, solid, real, ready to carry her back to a life she almost destroyed in service to her own righteousness. The Blackwood estate stands empty behind her as she walks toward the vehicle, but it no longer feels haunted. Just old, ready to crumble into the natural decay that claims all monuments to human hubris eventually. Sarah starts the engine and begins the long drive home to Virginia Beach, where a 12-year-old girl is probably getting ready for school and wondering if her mother will ever choose her over whatever demons drive her to abandon the people she claims to love. This time, Sarah thinks, gripping the steering wheel with hands that are fully, gratefully human, Emma won't have to wonder. The drive back to Virginia Beach stretches endlessly through morning traffic, giving Sarah too much time to think about the enormity of what she's returning to face. Every mile marker reminds her that she's driving toward a daughter who waited at a piano recital for a mother who never came, toward a husband who finally found the courage to protect their child from her increasingly destructive obsessions. The documents from Blackwood Estate sit in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, real evidence of historical atrocities that demand attention, but through proper channels, not supernatural intervention. Sarah has already drafted emails in her head to the Virginia Historical Society, to genealogical researchers specializing in slavery records, to legal organizations focused on reparative justice. She can honor the truth she uncovered without sacrificing her humanity to it. But first, she has to face Emma. The familiar streets of her neighborhood feel surreal after days suspended between life and death. Suburban lawns, sprinkler systems, children's bicycles abandoned on driveways, ordinary domestic life she almost traded away for the intoxicating righteousness of ghostly justice. Sarah parks in front of what used to be her house, noting the subtle changes that mark her exile. Newspapers accumulated despite Michael's usual tidiness, Emma's bedroom curtains drawn against daylight. Her key still works, but using it feels like trespassing. Inside, the house carries the hollow atmosphere of a home learning to function around an absence. Emma's breakfast dishes sit unwashed in the sink, Michael probably rushing to get her to school on time without his Keo parents' help. Sarah sets the Blackwood documents on the kitchen counter and calls her therapist, Dr. Martinez, whom she hasn't spoken to in over a year. The voicemail she leaves is carefully honest. "I've had a complete psychological break. I need emergency intervention before I cause any more damage to my family." Then she waits. Michael returns from work first, stopping short when he sees her at the kitchen table. His expression cycles through surprise, wariness, and something that might be relief. "You look different," he says carefully. "I am different." Sarah gestures to the chair across from her. I had what I think psychiatrists would classify as a severe dissociative episode. I convinced myself I was investigating supernatural crimes when I was really just having a breakdown triggered by guilt over profiting from historical trauma research. Michael sits slowly, studying her face for signs of the manic certainty that drove her away. The insurance case was real. The family's documented history of slavery and exploitation was real. My belief that I was chosen by spirits to become some kind of avenging angel, that was psychosis. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the shame burning her throat. I prioritized my savior complex over Emma's recital, over our marriage, over basic human decency. The front door opens before Michael can respond. Emma's voice carries from the entryway, "Dad, why is Mom's car?" She appears in the kitchen doorway, 12 years old and achingly beautiful, her expression guarded in ways that break Sarah's heart. "Hi, baby," Sarah says softly. Emma doesn't run to her or burst into tears. Instead, she studies her mother with the careful assessment of a child who has learned not to trust adult promises. "Are you staying this time?" The question cuts deeper than any supernatural curse could. Sarah meets her daughter's eyes without flinching. "I don't know if I'm allowed to stay. That's up to your dad and the courts now, but I'm not leaving again. Even if I have to live somewhere else while I get help, I'm not abandoning you for any cause, no matter how important I think it is. You missed my recital. I know. I'm sorry. Mrs. Patterson asked if you were sick. I didn't know what to tell her." Sarah swallows hard. "You can tell her I was sick, that I'm getting treatment so I can be the mother you deserve." Emma considers this with devastating adult logic. "What kind of sick?" "The kind where I started believing my work was more important than the people I love, where I convinced myself that saving strangers mattered more than taking care of my own daughter." Something shifts in Emma's posture, not forgiveness but acknowledgement. She's heard adults make excuses before, but this sounds like actual truth. "I wrote you a song," Emma says quietly, "for the recital. It was about missing someone." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Will you play it for me sometime?" "Maybe." Emma looks to Michael, reading permissions in his expression that Sarah no longer has the right to grant. "Can I go do homework?" After Emma leaves, Sarah and Michael sit in silence that carries the weight of 13 years together and an uncertain future apart. "I've already scheduled intensive therapy," Sarah says finally. "I'll do whatever the court requires for supervised visitation. I'll sign any agreements about my work, my travel, my decision-making around Emma." Michael nods slowly. "It's going to take time. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight." "I know." Sarah touches the envelope of documents. "But I'm committed to finishing what I started, the right way, as a living woman with a daughter who needs her." Outside, afternoon sunlight streams through ordinary windows, illuminating an ordinary kitchen where ordinary people try to heal ordinary damage. It's not the dramatic transformation Sarah once sought, but it's real. And for the first time in years, real feels like enough. The peace lasts exactly 18 hours. Sarah wakes on Michael's couch to her phone buzzing with an unknown number. The voice on the other end is crisp, professional, terrifying. "Dr. Chen? This is Detective Morrison with Virginia State Police. We need you to return to the Blackwood estate immediately. There's been a development." Her blood turns to ice. "What kind of development?" 3 historians from the University of Virginia went missing yesterday while investigating the property. Their advisor says you sent them there with research materials. We found their car in the driveway, but no sign of the researchers themselves. Sarah's hands shake as she processes this. She remembers sending those emails to the Historical Society, sharing copies of the Blackwood documents, suggesting the estate warranted academic investigation. She thought she was handling things properly, through legitimate channels, as a living woman committed to ordinary justice. "I'll be there in 2 hours, she manages. Michael appears in the doorway, already reading the crisis in her posture. "Sarah, whatever it is, the curse isn't finished with me." The words tumble out despite her effort to sound rational. I thought breaking free meant it was over, but I led other people into danger. 3 graduate students are missing. You're talking about supernatural forces again, Michael says carefully, the wariness returning to his voice. But Sarah is already moving, grabbing her keys, her research notes, the manila envelope that suddenly feels like it's burning her fingers. This isn't psychosis, this is consequence. I disturbed something at that estate, and now innocent people are paying for it. Emma appears behind Michael, still in her school clothes. Mom, are you leaving again? The question stops Sarah cold. Here it is, the ultimate test of everything she claimed to learn. Choose her daughter's stability, or race back to play supernatural detective. Pick ordinary love or extraordinary righteousness. The decision that broke her marriage, that drove her to the edge of dissolution, presenting itself again in starker terms. I don't know, Sarah admits, hating herself for the honesty. Emma's face closes off completely. You said you wouldn't abandon me for any cause. I said that. I meant that. But if people are in danger because of my actions, there will always be people in danger. Michael interrupts, his voice carrying 13 years of watching this pattern destroy their family. There will always be another case, another crisis, another reason why Sarah Chen's moral certainty matters more than her daughter's childhood. Sarah looks between them, her husband who has finally found the strength to set boundaries, her daughter who is learning not to trust maternal promises. Everything she fought to reclaim hangs in the balance of this moment. Her phone rings again. Detective Morrison, voice more urgent. Dr. Chen, we need you here now. We found something in the basement that... Just get here. Bring any additional materials you have about the family's history. Through the kitchen window, Sarah can see other houses where other families are sitting down to ordinary dinners, helping with ordinary homework, living ordinary lives that don't require choosing between love and justice. The domestic peace she tasted for 18 hours feels as fragile as spun glass. If I go, she says slowly, meeting Emma's eyes, I might not come back. Not because I'll choose to stay, but because whatever's at that estate is specifically designed to trap people like me, people who think they can save everyone. Emma's 12-year-old logic cuts straight to the heart, then don't go. But if those students die because I ran away, they're not your responsibility, Michael says firmly. You sent them academic materials. You didn't force them to investigate. You're not responsible for every bad thing that happens to every person who crosses paths with your work. Sarah stares at the phone in her hand, feeling the weight of 3 missing lives against the weight of 1 damaged daughter. The curse knew exactly how to present this choice, not between obvious good and evil, but between 2 forms of love. Love for strangers in danger, love for the child whose trust she's already shattered once. I can send the police everything I have, she says finally, setting the phone down. I can consult remotely, share all my research, help them understand what they're dealing with, but I'm not going back to that house. The relief in Emma's posture is immediate and heartbreaking. A 12-year-old shouldn't have to fear her mother will choose martyrdom over motherhood, but that's the dynamic Sarah created through years of righteous obsession. She calls Detective Morrison back, her voice steady. I'm emailing you everything I have about the Blackwood family history, but I won't return to the estate. Find someone else to consult on site. Dr. Chen, you're the expert on this case. I'm a mother, Sarah interrupts, surprising herself with the finality in her voice. And this time, that's going to be enough. The curse has presented its final test, and for the first time in her adult life, Sarah Chen chooses the small, ordinary, absolutely essential love over the grand, dramatic, ultimately destructive calling. Outside, 3 graduate students remain missing. Inside, 1 daughter begins to believe her mother might actually stay. The phone rings again 20 minutes later. This time, Sarah doesn't even look at the screen. Mom, Emma says from her homework spread across the dining room table, your phone. I know. Sarah continues folding laundry, ordinary domestic work that feels like a radical act of defiance. I'm not answering it. But the calls keep coming. Every few minutes, the ringtone slices through their tentative family peace. Michael finally walks over and powers the device off completely. "There," he says. "Whatever's happening at that estate can happen without you." Sarah nods, but her hands shake as she matches Emma's socks. She can feel it building, the familiar pressure behind her sternum, the voice that whispers she's abandoning her duty, letting innocent people suffer for her selfish choice. The curse doesn't need supernatural manifestations now. It lives in her own psychology, 13 years of conditioning that equates maternal love with moral failure. "I can't stop thinking about them," she admits. "Those students. What if they're trapped in that house right now, experiencing what I experienced?" "Then the police will handle it," Michael says firmly, "like they handle every other dangerous situation that doesn't involve you. But I have expertise they don't. Knowledge that could—" "Sarah," Emma's voice cuts through her spiraling justifications. "You're doing it again." The 12-year-old assessment hits like ice water. Sarah sees herself clearly, standing in her own kitchen, folding her daughter's clothes and still trying to construct elaborate rationales for abandonment. The curse's final confrontation isn't dramatic at all. It's this, the quiet, persistent voice that insists her guilt matters more than her presence. "You're right," Sarah says, setting down the laundry. "I'm doing it again." She sits at the table next to Emma's homework, basic algebra problems that represent everything ordinary and essential. Sarah almost traded away. The normalcy feels surreal after days of supernatural terror, but it's real, more real than any ghostly justice she thought she was serving. "Tell me about your day," Sarah says. "All of it. I want to hear about your classes, your friends, what you ate for lunch." Emma looks suspicious, like this might be a trick. "Just normal stuff. Normal stuff is what I missed. Normal stuff is what I want." So Emma talks about her science project on genetics, about drama with her friend Madison, about how Mr. Peterson makes everyone solve math problems on the board, even though it gives her anxiety. Sarah listens with desperate attention, trying to memorize every detail of the life she nearly abandoned. Outside, police sirens wail in the distance, probably heading toward Route 64, toward Blackwood Estate, toward whatever supernatural crisis Sarah chose not to solve. The sound makes her flinch, but she doesn't move from the table. "It's hard," she admits to Michael and Emma. "Sitting here while people might be in danger. It goes against everything I thought I was." "What did you think you were?" Emma asks with characteristic directness. Sarah considers this carefully. Someone important. Someone whose work mattered more than regular people's feelings. Someone chosen to fix things other people couldn't understand. "That sounds lonely," Emma observes. The simple honesty devastates Sarah completely. "It was terribly lonely, even when I was surrounded by historical documents and academic recognition and people telling me how vital my research was, especially then, because none of it was about connection. It was about being special." Michael reaches across the table, covering her hand with his. "And now? Now I want to help Emma with algebra. I want to know what you're reading, what you thought about at work today, whether we need milk. I want to be ordinary." The word settles around them like a benediction. Ordinary. The thing Sarah spent her career rejecting, the life she convinced herself was beneath someone with her gifts. But sitting here, watching Emma work through equations while Michael reviews case files at the kitchen counter, ordinary feels like the most precious thing imaginable. Around 9 p.m., Michael's laptop chimes with a news alert. 3 University of Virginia students found safe at a hotel in Richmond, claiming they left Blackwood Estate after equipment malfunctions and weird atmospheric pressure. No supernatural intervention required, no specialized expertise needed, just college kids smart enough to leave when things felt wrong. "They're okay," Michael says, relief evident in his voice. Sarah feels the last thread of the curse's hold snap completely. The students saved themselves. The world continued functioning without her intervention. Justice doesn't require her martyrdom. Truth doesn't demand her sacrifice. And the most important work she'll ever do is sitting right here at this kitchen table, helping a 12-year-old understand that X always has a value, even when you can't see it yet. The confrontation she expected never came. No dramatic battle, no supernatural showdown, just the choice, made quietly and repeatedly, to stay present for the small, essential love that makes everything else possible. "Mom," Emma says, looking up from her homework, "will you help me practice piano tomorrow?" "Yes," Sarah answers without hesitation. "I'll be here." The words hang in the kitchen air like a promise Sarah isn't sure she can keep. Emma's question about piano practice seems simple enough, but underneath it lies the weight of every broken commitment, every missed recital, every time Sarah chose abstract justice over concrete love. "Actually," Sarah says, her voice catching slightly, "there's something I need to tell you both first." Michael looks up from his laptop, and Emma's pencil stops moving across her homework. The kitchen suddenly feels too quiet, too fragile, like the domestic peace they've built over these past few hours might shatter with whatever comes next. Sarah reaches for the manila envelope she's been carrying, the Blackwood documents that started everything. Her hands shake as she opens it, revealing the copied pages of plantation records, genealogical charts, insurance forms. The paper feels heavier than it should, weighted with history and consequence. "I can't keep these," she says simply. "And I can't keep doing the kind of work that brings things like this into our home." Michael sets his laptop aside completely. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that to truly choose you, both of you, I have to give up forensic genealogy entirely. Not just this case, all of it." The words taste like ash, like everything she thought she was dissolving on her tongue. "Every time I dig into family histories tied to historical trauma, I risk becoming obsessed again. I risk prioritizing the dead over the living." Emma looks confused. "But that's your job, Mom. That's what you're good at." Sarah's laugh comes out broken. "I thought it was what I was good at. But look what it cost us. Look what it almost cost again." She gestures to the documents. "I can't trust myself with other people's generational pain. I turn it into my own heroic narrative instead of treating it with the clinical distance it requires." "So what would you do instead?" Michael's voice is carefully neutral, but Sarah can hear the fear underneath. Fear that this is just another dramatic gesture that will collapse under practical pressure. Insurance investigation has other specialties: financial fraud, medical claims, property damage, cases where the worst thing that happens is I become too invested in spreadsheets. Sarah touches Emma's homework, the simple algebra problems that represent everything stable and solvable. "I could work locally, be home for dinner every night, never travel to places where the past might speak too loudly." The sacrifice feels enormous and necessary. Forensic genealogy isn't just Sarah's career, it's her identity, her claim to importance, her justification for every social awkwardness and emotional distance. Without it, she's just a woman with a graduate degree in history, qualified to teach high school or process insurance paperwork. "You love that work," Emma says quietly, displaying the devastating perception that 12-year-olds develop when they've watched their parents too closely. "Won't you be sad?" "I love the idea of that work," Sarah corrects. "I love feeling chosen, feeling like I have access to truth other people can't see. But the actual work, the way I do it, destroys everything I touch, including the families I'm supposed to help." She pulls out her phone and, before she can reconsider, deletes her professional email account. Years of contacts, case files, academic correspondence, gone with a few taps. The action feels like stepping off a cliff, but also like finally touching solid ground. "I'm calling my supervisor tomorrow to request reassignment to standard property claims. No family histories, no genealogical research, no cases involving historical trauma." Sarah's voice grows stronger with each word. "And I'm burning these documents tonight. The Blackwood family's story ends with me." Michael reaches across the table, covering her hand with his. "That's not a small thing you're giving up." "No," Sarah agrees. "It isn't. It's everything I thought made me special. Everything I thought justified the way I've lived for the past 13 years. She looks at Emma, memorizing her daughter's face in the kitchen lamplight. But it turns out being ordinary, being present, being reliable, being someone you can count on for piano practice, that's actually harder than solving supernatural mysteries. And more important, Emma considers this with the seriousness she brings to difficult math problems. Will it be enough, just being regular? The question cuts to the heart of Sarah's deepest fear, that without her professional identity, without the adrenaline of historical detective work, she might discover there's nothing interesting about her at all, no reason for her family to want her around. I don't know, Sarah admits, but I'm going to find out, because the alternative is losing you entirely, and that's not acceptable. Outside, the night settles over their neighborhood like a blanket. Ordinary houses full of ordinary families, living ordinary lives that somehow manage to contain all the love and meaning anyone could need. Sarah Chen, former forensic genealogist, future insurance adjuster, finally understands that extraordinary was always the wrong goal. The sacrifice is complete. Tomorrow, she'll start learning how to be enough. Sarah wakes at 6:30 to the sound of Emma practicing piano in the living room, scales flowing into a halting rendition of Fur Elise, the same piece she'd been working on before Sarah left for Virginia 3 weeks ago. The continuity feels miraculous. While Sarah was unraveling supernatural curses and confronting generational sins, Emma kept practicing, kept living, kept being 12 years old in a world that continued spinning without maternal supervision. Michael is already up, making coffee in the kitchen where last night's documents have been reduced to a small pile of ash in the metal wastebasket. Sarah had burned them page by page while her family watched, each sheet curling and blackening until the Blackwood legacy became nothing more than carbon and memory. The manila envelope sits empty on the counter, harmless now. "How do you feel?" Michael asks, handing her a mug. Sarah considers the question carefully. She feels hollow in places where her professional identity used to live, uncertain about what fills her days now that she's not chasing historical justice. But underneath the disorientation runs something steadier, relief that feels almost physical, like setting down a weight she'd carried so long she forgot it was there. Like, "I don't know who I am," she admits. But like, "I might actually want to find out." Emma's piano practice stops abruptly, followed by the sound of frustrated sighs from the living room. Without thinking, Sarah moves toward the noise, not to solve it or analyze it or turn it into something larger than itself, but simply to be present for her daughter's small struggle. "Trouble spot?" Sarah asks, settling on the piano bench beside Emma. "The bridge section. My left hand keeps doing the wrong thing." Emma demonstrates, her fingers stumbling through a passage that's clearly been giving her trouble for days. Sarah hasn't touched piano keys in 15 years, but muscle memory guides her hands to the correct position. Like this. See how your pinky has to reach for that B flat? It feels awkward at first. They practice the section together, slowly, until Emma's fingers find their confidence. Such a small thing, helping with piano practice on a Tuesday morning, but it feels more essential than any historical mystery Sarah ever solved. This is what presence looks like. Attention without agenda, help without heroics. At breakfast, Michael mentions that his firm is handling a new case, insurance fraud involving falsified medical claims, simple contemporary deception with no generational trauma attached. The kind of work Sarah might actually be qualified to do without losing herself in other people's pain. "I could make some calls," he offers, "if you're serious about the career change." "I'm serious." The certainty in Sarah's voice surprises even her. "I spent yesterday morning researching property claims investigation. It's detailed work that requires analytical thinking, but it doesn't involve digging up anyone's ancestral secrets." Emma looks up from her cereal. "Will you make less money?" The practical question from a 12-year-old cuts straight through Sarah's romantic notions about sacrifice. Yes, she'll make less money, significantly less. Their family will have to adjust expectations, maybe refinance the mortgage, certainly skip the European vacation Michael mentioned last month. Probably, Sarah says honestly. Is that okay with you? Emma shrugs with the adaptability of childhood. Madison's mom works at the bank and they seem fine. I don't need expensive stuff. I just need you to not disappear anymore. The simple clarity of Emma's priorities makes Sarah's throat tighten. Her daughter doesn't want a mother who solves supernatural mysteries or achieves professional recognition or gets quoted in academic journals. She wants a mother who remembers to pick her up from school and helps with homework and notices when she's struggling with piano. After Emma leaves for school and Michael heads to work, Sarah sits alone in the kitchen with her laptop and begins the practical work of rebuilding her life. She emails her supervisor requesting transfer to standard property claims, updates her resume to emphasize analytical skills while downplaying genealogical expertise, deletes her professional social media accounts where colleagues have been sharing theories about the Blackwood case. Each action feels like pruning, cutting away the elaborate professional identity she cultivated to reveal something smaller but possibly more genuine underneath. Sarah Chen, insurance investigator. Sarah Chen, piano practice supervisor. Sarah Chen, woman learning to be ordinary. Around noon, her phone rings. An unknown number with a Virginia area code. Sarah stares at the screen, feeling the old familiar pull. What if it's Detective Morrison with new developments? What if another family needs her specialized expertise? What if this is her chance to prove she can handle supernatural cases responsibly? She lets it go to voicemail. Whatever is happening in Virginia, whatever mysteries remain unsolved, whatever justice still needs pursuing, the world will have to find another champion. Sarah has finally learned the difference between being called and being compelled, between genuine service and elaborate self-importance. At 3:15, she's waiting in the school pickup line, like countless other ordinary mothers, ready to ask her daughter about her day. The return. Emma climbs into the passenger seat with her backpack slung over one shoulder and paint smudged on her fingers, art-class evidence that makes Sarah's heart catch with the simple beauty of a normal Tuesday. Her daughter looks older somehow, more self-possessed, as if the weeks of increased independence have settled. Something fundamental about who she is in the world. How was school? Sarah asks, pulling away from the pickup line. Good. We started our family history project in social studies. Emma buckles her seatbelt, seemingly unaware of the irony. Mrs. Patterson wants us to interview relatives about immigration stories or family traditions. I was thinking I could talk to Grandma Chen about coming from Taiwan. The mention of genealogical work sends a familiar spike of anxiety through Sarah's chest, but she breathes through it. This isn't her professional obsession speaking. It's her daughter's homework assignment, ordinary and manageable and contained within normal boundaries. That sounds perfect, Sarah says, meaning it. We can call her tonight. They drive through neighborhoods Sarah barely noticed during her years of frantic professional travel, past the elementary school where Emma learned to read, the library where they used to attend story time, the park where a younger Emma fed ducks while Sarah answered work emails on her phone, the landscape of ordinary motherhood, invisible when she was chasing historical phantoms across state lines. At home, Emma spreads her homework across the kitchen table, the same surface where last night Sarah burned the Blackwood documents. The contrast feels deliberate, like the universe offering her a choice between past trauma and present responsibility. Emma's worksheets cover pre-algebra, Spanish vocabulary, and a science lab report about plant growth, concrete, solvable problems with clear answers. Sarah settles beside her daughter and actually reads the assignment sheets instead of scanning them while mentally composing case reports. The attention feels rusty at first. When did she lose the ability to focus completely on something this simple? But gradually her mind stops fragmenting into professional concerns and settles into the rhythm of helping with homework. "Mom?" Emma says, looking up from her Spanish worksheet. "You seem different today. Calmer, I guess." The observation catches Sarah off guard. She'd been so focused on the internal work of choosing ordinary life that she hadn't considered how the change might appear from the outside. But Emma's right. The constant low-level anxiety that drove Sarah toward increasingly complex professional challenges has simply evaporated, leaving behind a steadiness she barely remembers feeling. I think I'm finally learning how to be where I am instead of somewhere else, Sarah says. Emma considers this with the seriousness she brings to complicated concepts. Is that hard? Harder than I expected. Easier than I thought. Sarah touches the edge of Emma's worksheet, anchoring herself in the present moment. For years, I convinced myself that being physically present was the same as actually paying attention. But my mind was always somewhere else, in the past, in other people's problems, in my own ideas about what kind of person I should be. They work in comfortable silence for 20 minutes, Emma puzzling through conjugating irregular verbs, while Sarah simply exists beside her without trying to solve anything larger than homework problems. The ordinariness feels revolutionary. When Michael arrives home at 6:30, he finds them at the kitchen table surrounded by completed assignments and the remnants of an after-school snack. The domestic tableau is so normal it's almost surreal, like a photograph of the family they might have been if Sarah had never developed her obsession with historical justice. "Good day?" he asks, kissing the top of Sarah's head with careful tenderness. "Completely ordinary," Sarah replies, and the words carry weight they've never held before. Emma finished her homework. I researched property claims procedures. We called my mother about family immigration stories. Nothing dramatic happened. Michael's smile is cautious, but genuine. After years of marriage, to someone who transformed every small event into potential crisis or professional opportunity, Sarah's embrace of mundane routine probably feels too good to trust completely. Over dinner, they discuss practical matters. Emma's upcoming parent-teacher conference, the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, weekend plans that involve grocery shopping and piano recital preparation instead of historical research trips. Sarah finds herself genuinely interested in these details, no longer viewing domestic logistics as obstacles to more important work. "I heard back from my supervisor today," Sarah mentions as they're clearing dishes. "The transfer to property claims is approved. I start Monday." Emma looks up from loading the dishwasher. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Sarah admits. "I've spent 13 years being an expert at something specific. Now I get to start over as a beginner at something completely different." She pauses, considering her daughter's question more deeply. "But it's good terror, the kind that means you're growing instead of just repeating the same patterns." That night, as Emma practices piano in the living room and Michael reviews case files at the kitchen table, Sarah sits on the front porch and watches their neighbors live their ordinary lives. Mrs. Rodriguez waters her garden. The Henderson kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. Mr. Kim walks his elderly dog past their house, the same route he's taken every evening for the 5 years they've lived here. This is what she almost traded away, not just her family, but her place in a community of people living small, essential lives without supernatural drama or historical significance. The revelation isn't dramatic. It's quiet, persistent, like learning to hear a song that was always playing underneath the noise. Sarah Chen has finally come home, the new beginning. 6 months later, Sarah measures her life in piano scales and insurance forms, in grocery lists and bedtime stories, in all the small rituals that once seemed insufficient, but now feel like the truest kind of wealth. Her new office overlooks a parking lot instead of a university courtyard. Her desk holds photographs of Emma at her piano recital and Michael at their anniversary dinner. Ordinary moments that anchor her to the present instead of pulling her into other people's pasts. The work involves flood damage assessments and fire insurance claims, cases where the most supernatural element might be someone's creative interpretation of replacement costs. "Chen, you've got the Patterson property file," her supervisor calls across the cubicle maze. "Looks like storm damage, pretty straightforward." Sarah takes the manila folder, thinner than the genealogical cases that once consumed her, containing photographs of roof damage and repair estimates instead of centuries-old documents that whispered of curses. The simplicity no longer feels like failure. It feels like freedom. At lunch, she eats a sandwich at her desk and calls Emma's school to confirm pickup times for the science fair. Such ordinary maternal logistics, the kind she used to delegate to Michael while chasing historical ghosts across state lines. Now these small responsibilities feel like privileges, evidence of a life lived forward instead of backward. Her phone buzzes with a text from Michael, dinner at 7. Emma wants to show you her project on Taiwan immigration. The family history assignment Sarah helped navigate without once losing herself in genealogical obsession, without turning her daughter's homework into her own professional mission. Perfect, she types back. I'll pick up groceries. The grocery store is fluorescent lit and mundane, filled with other ordinary people making ordinary choices about dinner. Sarah moves through the aisles without urgency, selecting ingredients for Emma's favorite stir-fry, pausing to compare prices on cereal brands. The woman she used to be would have rushed through this errand while mentally composing case reports. Now she has space to notice details. The elderly man carefully reading nutrition labels, the mother negotiating snack choices with her toddler, the teenage clerk practicing Spanish under his breath. These people living their unexamined lives suddenly seem like the wisest philosophers, the most successful human beings. They've mastered the art Sarah spent 42 years failing to learn, how to be fully present for their own existence. At home, Emma greets her with excitement about the science fair project, a study of plant growth that required 3 weeks of careful observation and daily measurements. The kind of sustained attention Sarah once reserved for dead people's secrets, now applied to living things in real time. Look at the difference between the control group and the ones with fertilizer, Emma explains, pointing to charts and photographs. The control plants grew too, just slower. I thought they might not grow at all without help, but they found a way. Sarah studies her daughter's careful documentation, seeing metaphor everywhere, but keeping it to herself. The plants that thrived without special intervention, the growth that happened gradually, the patience required to observe change day by day instead of demanding dramatic transformation. Beautiful work, Sarah says simply. I'm proud of how carefully you paid attention. Over dinner, Emma presents her family history project, interviews with Grandma Chen about leaving Taiwan, about building a new life in America through ordinary courage and daily perseverance. Stories of survival that don't involve supernatural curses or historical drama, just the quiet heroism of people choosing to keep going. Grandma said the hardest part wasn't leaving, Emma reads from her notes. It was learning to be ordinary in a new place. She'd been important in Taiwan, a teacher, someone people respected. Here, she had to start over, learn English, work in a restaurant. But she said becoming ordinary was what let her become extraordinary as a grandmother. Sarah's throat tightens. Her daughter's homework has captured truths that Sarah spent years running from, wisdom that could only be found by staying still long enough to notice it. After Emma goes to bed, Sarah and Michael sit on their front porch in the warm evening air. The neighborhood settles into its nightly rhythms. Porch lights coming on, dogs being walked, families visible through kitchen windows living their unremarkable, essential lives. Any regrets? Michael asks quietly. Sarah considers the question seriously. She misses the intellectual challenge of genealogical work sometimes, the satisfaction of solving complex puzzles. But she doesn't miss the obsession, the way important work became a justification for emotional absence. She doesn't miss being perpetually haunted by other people's traumas. I regret how long it took me to understand the difference between being called to something and being addicted to it, she says finally. But I don't regret choosing this. Emma's piano practice drifts through the open windows. Fur Elise played all the way through without stumbling, months of patient practice finally bearing fruit. The sound wraps around them like a blessing, like proof that some things grow slowly and beautifully when tended with ordinary love. Sarah Chen, insurance investigator, mother, wife, ordinary woman, living an extraordinary life disguised as everyday routine, has finally learned to be enough.